We made the test pilot a hero figure of our age, modest, carefree, invariably handsome, young. He might also die young, but somehow that added to the legend. But did we simply make another myth?
Over the past 10 years, there has been a tremendous change from the old prima donna, dashing test pilot approach to things. In fact, it's nearer 15 years, I think, this change has taken place, to nowadays where we are a member of a highly specialized team, and only a member. Firstly, this must be so because there's very little risk in the game. It's too expensive to take big risks, so that every stage, whether it's design, engineering, development, testing, improving, or the actual flying, has to be approached very slowly. Every one of the team is in at each phase, knowing what goes on, and when it comes to the flight phase, we are only just extending that testing. This is all we're doing. We're not trying something out new and unknown ever again. This is far too expensive and risky.
Deflating. But to fly at heights and speeds like this must need a man without ordinary fear. A veteran Spitfire test pilot.
I would say a man who is without fear or claims to be without fear is a fool, not to mention a menace, and certainly there would be no place for such a man in test flying. What you want is a man who is subject to all the normal human reactions of this sort, but is thoroughly well able to analyze them and control them and identify them.
Living with sensations like these must require something way out of the ordinary. What qualities do make a test pilot?
He must be capable of admitting he's made a mistake readily and quickly, because a covered-up mistake in the air that's not noticeable on instrumentation, and it is possible for this to happen, can cause endless delays and be very, very costly indeed. A test pilot must have a high degree of tenacity. This is an odd word, perhaps, to use in connection with piloting, but it applies to military pilots very much. The ability to not only be trained to do the task, but to be able to hang on and do the task accurately under pressure when things are a bit difficult. They do get difficult in test flying sometimes. And I think that also, perhaps one of the most important features is that the pilot must have a highly developed sense of self-preservation. It's essential to be able to weigh up the risks and be prepared to accept the risks which are perhaps inevitable, but not take unnecessary risks.
So some risk is inevitable. What can happen in the few seconds when things go violently wrong in a supersonic military aircraft, when thinking time is a luxury?
We were fairly high and fairly fast when something happened which meant that our only course was to eject. At the time, I had a flight observer with me who, first class at his job, but just a little slow in thinking in cases of emergency. And it was always a little bit of a worry to me that if we had to get out of an aircraft in a hurry, he might pause to ask why, in which case he'd be talking to himself. But on this occasion, hardly had the incident occurred than I was on my own, not having uttered a word. The circumstances under which he got out, I thought, wouldn't left much of him remaining, but I got out much later, under more favourable conditions from the physiological aspect, and I was very surprised to look up and see this other chap calmly floating down above me.
Test flying may be a step-by-step affair, but you can still get kicked hard.
It's inevitable from time to time that incidents will happen, despite a lot of care that's taken on development programs, that you move forward in very, very careful steps. You work strictly to a program laid down by the flight development, and you stick to the limitations that you are given. From time to time, however, things happen outside your control and you get your knuckles wrapped hard, and I think this is the price that you pay for progress.
That was Bill Bedford, who was unhurt in his crash. For some years, he was chief test pilot of the Hawker-Siddeley vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, one of the few major developments in aviation since flying began. Now we see it as the Harrier, unique of its kind and unique in its testing program. A Harrier pilot has only one extra control in his cockpit, a lever. Move it back and the jet nozzles swivel downwards for takeoff. Ease the throttle forwards so that the jets blast downwards and the Harrier will become airborne. Once airborne, press a button to retract the undercarriage, ease the nozzle lever forward so the jets swivel back, and you have a strike fighter aircraft. It may seem simple, but the story of the tests alone show how complex flight programs have become.
The initial flying program on the Harrier was commenced with tethered hovering, with the aeroplane confined within wire tethers so that it could only go up about 3 or 4 feet. We did about 27 or so of these liftoffs in the first month. Then we cut the tethers free and we were able to operate like a bird out of a cage, and it was with a great feeling of relaxation that we got away from the confines of the tethering system.
But tethered flying and hovering were only the beginning of the program.
Then later on, we operated the aeroplane like a conventional aircraft, taking it off normally, flying it around the skies like a high-performance fighter, and then landing it conventionally at the end.
After all that, there was still one crucial step left.
By this time, we had another aircraft in the program, so we were able to use one aeroplane to lift off vertically and translate forwards to a speed of about 90 knots. And the conventional airplane was then slowed down to the same speed of 90 knots. We'd bridged the gap, therefore, between hovering and conventional flying, and we knew the time was safe to do our full transitions.
The first full flight reached 50 feet and lasted 5 minutes, but it had taken 18 months to achieve from its first tethered hover. Testing the Harrier has been a long, tough job, but Harrier-like aircraft may be part of the answer to the problem of city-to-city travel. It's a job they'll probably share with helicopters, using rotor blades for takeoff and jets for forward thrust. This is a new Westland Sea King, which will be used by the Royal Navy for submarine hunting. But in this test flight, you can see some of the potential it could have for commercial use. Donald Ferguson, the pilot, is heading the Sea King out from Yeovil to the English Channel. There he will test a highly complex automatic pilot, which is programmed to take over the helicopter when he gives the word for transition. The automatic pilot will then fly it from that altitude down to a preset height just above the water, and also reduce the speed continually so that the Sea King slows down to a hover. The pilot is keeping in radar touch while he prepares to hand over to a machine more accurate than any human being. Once the Sea King has started to hover, the crew will then test the sonar buoy, the submarine detection apparatus. This will also influence the attitude of the helicopter, keeping it vertically over the buoy. The pilot now prepares to hand over to the machine.
When I give the instructions to press the transition down, my co-pilot will press transition down and the aircraft will go into a programmed approach to the hover, losing height and speed uniformly to a hover at a preset 40 feet. 40 feet is set there. All right, my transition down.
3, 2, 1. Now, transition down engaged.
The aircraft is now flying itself to the hover. I monitor the controls because clearly any automatic system is only as safe as the pilot allows it to be by monitoring and make sure there's no kind of a runaway, which could well be disastrous at this sort of height. But although I'm monitoring the controls as of this moment are being moved by the sensing from the automatic pilot is flying into the hover. The speed you will see is coming back now to 55 knots, and the height is uniformly decreasing. The rudder pedals which control the direction of the aircraft are being controlled by the compass which is holding the heading as I set it in. We're now slowing up and hoping that the height is going to come down to 40 feet, which is set on my set hover height.
A machine has brought the helicopter down and into a hover. The sonar buoy is launched.
Selecting down. Buoy leaving aircraft, satisfactory. 5, 10 feet, out of engine at 11 feet. 40 submerged. 60. 80. 100. 120. 140 feet. Total cable height, 140 feet.
The sonar operator will now start transmitting sound waves over various ranges up to several thousand yards underwater in the search for submarines.
I will now transmit on the 4,000 yard range. Transmitting on 8,000 yard range.
It's vital for the sonar cable to hang vertically from the Sea King. If it doesn't, it'll dangle against signaling apparatus, which will correct the helicopter's attitude, again, automatically.
40, submerged light out, attended and inching.
Doppler hold.
Coming up into the aircraft, inching satisfactory, indicated housed, indicated latched, brake on.
The whole operation has been carried out by automatic apparatus, not only more sensitive than men, but far more complex than ordinary automatic pilots. Helicopter and fixed-wing testing has now become a team job. Much of the work on these odd-looking beasts is done on the ground. How much say does the pilot have nowadays? Westland's chief test pilot, Ron Gellertley.
The pilot today has not a great deal of individual say because of this team effort, but he has one particular area in which he, and only he, can make a statement and has got to be accepted. And this, of course, concerns handling. Performance is a pretty exact science today. The engineering integrity has got to be exact. But when it comes to the handling, the actual qualities of flying that machine and how it responds, then qualitatively he has still got quite a lot to say, though we are tending to even make this an exact science.
There was certainly no exact science in this man's assessment of how his plane handled, but he succeeded. Jeffrey Quill's name will always be associated with one great aeroplane, the Spitfire, even though he wasn't the first man to fly it. Everyone liked the look of the Spitfire, but it was up to Quill and his team to test it as a fighter. He was a test pilot from a different generation. His responsibility was to help guide the destiny of a superb aircraft from 1936 into the Battle of Britain in 1940, and beyond that throughout the war. Yet these were fairly rudimentary days of test flying. No computers, no simulators, just teams of men from designers to mechanics who got together determined to make the thing work. This is one of Quill's last flights 5 years ago when he delivered a rebuilt Spitfire to the RAF. By today's standards, pre-war test flying might seem amateurish.
In one sense, I suppose you could say that we were much more amateur in the old days, but nevertheless, there were a number of outstandingly good test pilots. One can think of, chaps like George Bullman and Cyril Ewins and so on, and nobody could possibly have called them amateurs. They had obviously a basic sort of understanding and feel for an aeroplane and made enormous contributions. You've got people like Mutt Summers, who was undoubtedly had a tremendous sort of flair for for getting the best out of an aeroplane, and particularly for his sort of ability to transmit it to designers. We used to have a certain rather sort of elementary amount of recording apparatus. We had no out-of-ground telemetry or anything of that sort, and during my sort of span as a test pilot, of course, there were enormous and very rapid developments in this sort of recording equipment, and therefore the ability to measure things quantitatively as opposed to relying on qualitative assessment. But going back to the question, certainly in the early days, one was dependent very largely on sort of qualitative assessment, and I mean, this was one of the tools of the trade. I think I had used this thing for about 12 or 14 years, and has in fact made 2 parachute descents in its time. This was the thing on which you really wrote everything down. This carried a piece of card or several pieces of card, and sometimes you slipped one in and another one in, and you used up 3 or 4. In the case of a flight, you had a stopwatch there. And whether you were doing performance measurement, or whether you were doing some testing in connection with the basic sort of engineering performance of the aeroplane, we used to get a lot of built-in instrumentation, all sorts of special stuff festooned all around the cockpit, but you had to read it yourself and write it all down. My first flight consisted of a very short flight around and 2 landings, 2 takeoffs and 2 landings. I was absolutely completely familiar with the cockpit. I'd sat in it for hours. I could have touched anything blindfold. And I had a very good briefing from Mutt, who had already flown it about 6 times by the time I flew it. But it was something, of course, very, very different to anything one had ever flown before, and I remember having a tremendous feeling of elation. When I look back on it now and realize the issues that were at stake, and what the issues at stake with that little prototype aeroplane, the only one we had, and for 2 years we flew it, when I think of some of the things that I did with it, it makes me wake up in the middle of the night sweating.
Well, you were always a champion of the test pilots.
You get too old to go on flying, but never too old to talk about it. Tim Wood, a retired chief test pilot, revisits the flying club at his old base in Yorkshire.
Parties went on in the Spa, didn't they?
The Beverley, a brash, ugly transport of the 50s, was his big job. He recalls that special day in every pilot's life, the first flight.
First flights are always much more fun than any others because you're so controlled after the first flight. Well, the first flight of the Beverley, it was sort of, as usual, it's going to be ready one day, it never is, then it's the next day, and eventually it is ready and it's the big day. Well, the Beverley was a very large aeroplane. Well, it isn't these days, but it was then. The cockpit's 10 feet across, and there was only myself and Derek Braid, the head of flight test development, on board. And I know at the end of the runway, we were waiting for the wind to be in the right direction every day, and this day it seemed to be right, but blow me, as always happens, the wind dropped just about to take off. So he said, look at that wind, what are we going to do? And I said, well, at last it's ours, you better turn your hat round and let's go. And as we were going along, I said, I felt my side becoming airborne, and I didn't know what made me say, but I said to him, I said, well, this side's airborne is yours. And I helped to relieve the tension because you're a bit tense, although you outwardly don't show it. And anyhow, the flight went off perfectly all right. We carried out just the test we'd got to and came back. And then there's the usual celebration after that. A few drinks, and normally everybody's so relieved that it went off. And the usual remarks, of course, it's the finest aeroplane in the world, and absolutely nothing wrong with it at all. But then you do get down to serious testing after that. But I think that particular night, we all had a few drinks, plenty of beers, and somebody then had some scissors and was cutting everybody's ties off just here. So we're all going around with minus the bottom of your tie. It's a stupid thing to do. I think it's weeks and weeks of hard work from technical people, and it's just an outlet. And then following that, the next morning, which I think is bad, was a meeting discussing it all. So this will show you a sort of test by Liam. I didn't know too many technical terms. And in fact, I didn't bother to learn them. But we had a meeting, and during the course of the meeting, there was the word mu kept cropping up. I thought, I've never heard that to do with testing, and my mouth was dry, and I could see everybody else was a bit fed up. So in a pause in the conversation, I said, well, I don't know what this word mu is. I said, the only mu I know is mu stout. So everybody roared laughter, but it broke up the meeting, and then they carefully explained to me that mu meant scrubbing of tyres. And I said, well, why not call it simply tyres scrub instead of sort of likening it to beer and things like that.
But a generation passed, and new aircraft demanded men with deep technical understanding as well as experience. This is Roland Beaumont, now Director of Flight Operations at the British Aircraft Corporation at Preston. He's getting ready for the first flight of the TSR-2, which, though cancelled, was the last word in sophistication. The usual spectators, the usual tension on the ground. But Beaumont's first flight marks part of the change in test flying from an art to near science. He has behind him a massive engineering backup of the kind which has made these men seem more like elements of a computer. Beaumont describes the revolution which has overtaken the profession during his own flying career.
I started test flying at Hawkers during the second year of the war as on a rest from operational flying. And at that stage, this was just about the end of the period of unsophisticated test flying, where you just flew the aeroplane as high as it would go and you dived it as fast as it would go and got the trim right, and that was about the end of it. From that point onwards, of course, it became apparent that you could get very much more value out of every flight by measuring all the time everything that was going on, and particularly measuring areas where there was likely to be trouble, such as engine cooling or hydraulic situations, which the pilot couldn't do because he couldn't see what was going on. And that's where it all started. From then on, a significant part of test flying has been in the instrumenting of the aeroplane, so that you cram in every minute of the flight. You obtain the maximum possible information from the instrumentation in it. And these days, of course, in addition to that, you have ground-to-air telemetry and other sophisticated instrumentation aids. You get sort of massive information from each test sortie that, unless you are able to put this through a processing system very quickly, you then might defeat the whole object of the exercise, which is to test the aeroplane and get it cleared quickly, by having to wait to work out all the results by hand from the data you've recorded. And so you have this massive backup of computer and simulator work, and all the airborne data is fed into the simulators, and answers obtained from quick look facilities, which enable you to plan your next flight very quickly.
The clouds seen through the nose of this Canberra are masking the fields of Wiltshire. Below lies Boscombe Down, where future test pilots are trained. Now that the art has become a profession, the Empire Test Pilot School has become a kind of university of the air.
Good morning, gentlemen. The subject of this morning's lecture is roll coupling. Now, I thought I'd start off with something with...
The RAF officers who instruct the students are called tutors. The course lasts 10 exacting months. The students must have above-average flying ability, character, and courage. All are qualified pilots, the majority from the RAF. The school selects not only British pilots, but some from friendly nations whose governments pay. The CO is Captain Pat Chilton. There's no shortage of applicants, but standards are very high, and the course includes a strong grounding in theory.
Longitudinal stability being fairly large, right? Whereas our directional stability, also represented by springs here, being fairly small. You notice the modern slim aircraft with fairly small wings. Now, when I give it a rate of roll, you will notice, and I'll emphasize this first, all of a sudden you will find it will yaw. So if I turn it again very gently, and it's yawed. Right?
So, if you start getting near this divergence condition, do you get enough warning to take avoiding action in time?
I think probably, Mike, the demonstration model answers this as well as I can. The pilot suddenly goes over this critical roll rate, and then the yaw divergence is set in. In other words, there's nothing very much he can do about it.
Apart from theory, the students go through a practical course designed to produce a man who can flight test modern aircraft. This involves tutors whose lecture theatres are the cramped quarters of a cockpit. Squadron Leader Robinson is one of them, and aboard this Canberra, he's going to demonstrate how to stall the aircraft and how to recover from a potentially dangerous situation. The students will all go through this manoeuvre. It'll be part of their regular job in the future. The aircraft is throttled back, and flaps and wheels are used to reach the lowest controllable speed.
Coming down to 100 knots, I have no indication of stall as yet. No indication, slight amount of undercarriage buffet, masking it, 92 knots. Now I have a slight amount of airframe buffet. I am pulling on the stick with about 10 pounds, it's only about 1 inch back. Airframe buffet is getting rather more severe. Ailerons are still effective, rudder is effective, but very light. Coming back to 88 knots, and still the stick force, I'm pulling about 15 pounds now, 85 knots. Now the buffet is getting a little more pronounced, and the instrument panel is shaking, left wing trying to go down, trying to hold it up, and I am stalling. And in the stall, the left wing went down well. The buffet, I'm now recovering, power is going up. I lost about 2,000 feet on that.
The Test Pilot School is not solely concerned with military aircraft and pilots. The course includes instruction on handling civil aircraft like this Viscount.
Well, the tests that we're going to do now are asymmetric tests. Now, most of you have been used to military aircraft and under asymmetric power, and now we're going to start using British Certificate of Airworthiness requirements, which are civil requirements, and testing an aircraft such as the Viscount. What we want to look at first of all is VMCL, which is minimum control speed on the approach, and with 2 engines failed. And we want to go up, cut the 2 critical engines, which today we'll assume is number 1 and 2. Put full power on 3 and 4 in the landing configuration, or at least for this we'll just use landing flat. And full power on those 2, reduce the speed on the other 2, just reduce the speed of the aircraft until you reach a speed at which you reckon that you can't maintain control anymore. Now what I mean by losing control here is not what you may mean in a Hunter or a Canberra or something, but where you can't maintain the heading, in other words, the track that you want to go. There's nothing very difficult about this if you approach it in a sort of a calm, slow manner. In other words, let the speed come off at about a knot a second. Then you haven't got any big changes of control forces to cope with. And do your engine changes rather slowly.
Is one side more critical than the other for engine failure in the Viscount?
Yes, indeed it is. And I'm not going to tell you which is the most critical side, because that's one of the tests that you'll have to perform on your own.
Or just to get it back. Fine.
Throttle closed on 2.
Check.
Automat is closed.
Right.
Now, at 8,000 feet in the Viscount, one of the students, Flight Lieutenant Mick Hindley, is to have his first try at shutting down or feathering 2 of his 4 engines while keeping control of the aircraft. Squadron Leader Robinson, his tutor, is alongside him.
Feathering number 1.
Okay, feather. Press the button. Okay, feather number 2. All the way back through. Press the button. Roger. Keep your speed up above 140 knots. Full power, and start a left turn if you can, please. Keeping the speed up. They want us to turn left on the 060. That's right, that's fine.
I'll give you 13 for the moment on this one. These two.
I'd like 13.8 by 140.
13.8, okay.
Yeah, I'm 13.8 now.
You have sort of speed you'll be roundabout in the circuit. It'll certainly do for the demonstration anyway. 140 knots will be fine.
Oh, that's better.
060 they want all the way around.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. That's the way. Get that. You notice you have to use plenty of aileron.
Hindley has gone through the exercise, but he still has to restart the engines.
Okay, away you go. 1 second, 2. Fully open with that. Away. Keep pulling. Let go when it comes up. Yeah, yes. Keep pulling.
After every flying exercise, the students have to write a report on it within 10 days. They're all under continuous scrutiny. The reports are assessed and corrected by their tutors, and the tutor and student discuss them together. This is the hard graft of the course, and probably the least likeable part. Exams and revisions come often. There's a heavy stress on technical progress, together with test flying ability and personal qualities. So sophisticated is the business that eventually every test pilot may need a full engineering degree. But there's still time for some beer and skittles. On every course, the staff join the students in a local pub for a skittles match.
I'm not aware that you anticipated any
You'll find the commanding officer collecting his grub alongside any of the students. It's also a chance for the wives of the staff to have a night out. But probably more important, it gives them a chance to meet the wives of the students, most of whom are married. But once the students have graduated, life as a test pilot isn't always a laughing matter. It's mostly sheer hard work.
You're going to 8,000 feet, 250 knots, for stick taps and bonking. If that's satisfactory, increase to...
Oh, yes, yeah, right.
So if that's satisfactory...
No test pilot takes off today without a strict program for the flight, written in aerospace English. This is Jimmy Dell, chief test pilot of the British Aircraft Corporation at Preston. He's being briefed for a test flight in a Jaguar, the new Anglo-French supersonic strike aircraft which can attack with bombs and missiles and will also be built as a two-seat trainer.
Right.
The Jaguar will be ready for service next year, but so far only prototypes have flown.
Roger 6, you're clear to take off. Surface wind indicating 080 degrees, less than 5 knots. After passing 2,000 feet, turn left heading 330.
This is the first flight with dummy bombs mounted on the wings, and some of the tests will be on the wing structure. For the test run, Dell will take the Jaguar away from the Lancashire coast, over the Irish Sea, and up to southern Scotland.
5-0, thank you.
The Jaguar is now on its first series of tests. The methods used are very different and much more precise than old-style flying. Above all, they're more searching and rigorous. These flutter tests are deliberately designed to vibrate parts of the structure to see that they have the necessary strength for an aircraft which may have to withstand severe turbulence or even the blast of war. First, Dell fires small, precisely calculated explosive charges fitted into the wings, known in the trade as bunkers. You can't see the explosions, and the pilot can't always feel them. Bunkers can be fitted in the wings, fuselage, tail, any part of the structure that needs vibrating to ensure that any disturbance dies down quietly. Here, the fin on the tail of the Jaguar will flutter so rapidly the eye can barely detect it. This is another flutter test called frequency sweeping, and it's the latest way of stirring up an airframe to see how quickly disturbance dies down. The pilot can't move the rudder as rapidly as frequency sweeping demands, so the job has to be done by electronic apparatus which he switches on and off. As he does this, he'll feel the whole aircraft shudder around him. During the flight, radar scans the Jaguar's course. Radio contact is kept to the minimum. Performance details are never called out because our radio frequencies are monitored by the Russians. Dell has now taken the Jaguar up to 20,000 feet for more frequency sweeps. Although a lot of structural testing can be done on the ground, you get your final answers in the air, working up step by step, taking small bites at the overall performance requirements, ensuring that the aircraft isn't going to bite back by falling to pieces around you. All the information from these tests is recorded electronically. Analysis on the ground shows whether the structure is behaving properly or not. So tests only progress if the previous step has worked well.
Roger 6, starboard onto 170.
Under starboard 170.
It may sound odd, but firing explosives in the structure, making it shudder or flicker from side to side, tend to make flight testing safer. Things can still go wrong, but before these methods were known, weak parts could break off an aircraft before the pilot knew what was happening. The cost was man and machine. Now, after 1 hour and 20 minutes, it's time for Jimmy Dell to bring the Jaguar home to Preston.
Tarnish 6 Tower, clear to final, service wind indicating 095 degrees, 5 knots.
But the end of the flight doesn't mean the end of Dell's mission. He goes immediately into a debriefing with aerodynamicists.
We then did the frequency sweeps, and it's a real jazzy motion. But again, I didn't think it was as pronounced as with the tanks full, but I think I did those at high altitude.
No, they were the same.
Did I do some at 8?
You know there's much movement from the probe now, from the short probe? Oh no, there's nothing on that.
You almost have to stand up to see the probe now, of course, which is difficult. But it certainly doesn't move any more than other pieces of structure. It's fairly stiff.
Sweeps went okay, didn't it?
Sweeps went fine, and you can certainly detect the as we said before, with this lower frequency band, you can really detect the changes in frequency. With a bit of practice, I reckon you could get a chap calibrated to say that's 18.5 cycles per second, that sort of stuff.
After the debriefing, which is a quick off-the-cuff account of the main features of the flight, Dell's detail work begins. He's carried with him on the flight not only his notepad, still the standard tool of the trade, but a small voice recorder on which he's described all his actions as he's gone through them. From this and from his knee pad, he must now write out a detailed report which will supplement all his automatically recorded data. That's only a summary of a test flight. Behind it lies, as every pilot will insist, thousands of hours of work by a team of which he is only one member. But however much he would like to escape, he remains part of a Superman myth. The public think he's something larger than life, larger than them. Derek Whitehead spends some of his time travelling over the North Sea at speeds above 1,000 miles an hour. He wouldn't regard this as particularly remarkable. He's also an expert on aircraft carrier landings, one of the most intense forms of flying, demanding all the pilot ability that you can muster. He's about to test a Phantom.
Yogi 1, takeoff. Surface wind remains 060, 8 knots.
Now chief test pilot of Hawker Siddeley at Brough near Hull, Whitehead is in charge of test flying Phantoms and Buccaneers. But a man flying hot military aircraft has to relax. He gets some of his fun from a vintage biplane, the B-2, almost 40 years old. Derek Whitehead flies the B-2 partly as a release, a complete and utter change from the type of flying he does during his working week. He also flies it at local fetes to demonstrate aerobatics at low level and to stimulate interest in aviation. The wind is blowing around your face, sometimes difficult to maneuver. It takes you back to your earliest training days, and it's stimulating to go back in time from closed cockpits, high mark numbers, tight test schedules, the world in which he lives his week. Running round the airfield keeps you fit. There's a rigorous medical to pass every 6 months. But it's also an escape from the rigid self-control of test piloting and some of the office routine which goes with the job. The long-distance runner has a wife and 2 daughters living near the airfield. Elizabeth Whitehead describes the attitude of a test pilot's wife.
One has to make a life of one's own to occupy one's time, and husband goes in the morning and comes back in the evening, but in between times, if you sat and thought about what he's doing, you go quite, not just a little bit grey, you go quite grey altogether. But in the interim, one makes one's life of one's own. I'm interested in my animals, and I have my own horse, and my children, and my day is very fully occupied without too much worry about what's going on up in the air. It could be terribly worrying if one sat down and thought about it, and having no finger, I haven't got many fingernails, but there wouldn't be any at all if one worried about it too much.
Off duty, the Whiteheads like to spend as much time as possible away from flying and the talk of flying. They're both keen on horse riding. Despite appearances, their standard of living is not as high as one might think. Whitehead bought an old farmhouse, but did most of the work on it himself. In general, test pilots are less well paid than civil airline pilots, and the military pilot has to retire younger, around the mid-40s. Whitehead and his staff of pilots, flight observers and engineers go to the local baths once a week. Mostly it's simple horseplay, but it does tend to bring the individuals together into a team. Whitehead's daughter can also join in the fun. But there are times spent in the water which are neither fun nor horseplay. Whitehead takes his flight observers out into the North Sea at least once a year. They have to jump from an RAF air-sea rescue launch into the water and then survive until they're picked up by helicopter. Once in the water, they have to inflate their dinghies and then scramble aboard them. Although the RAF launch stands by while they're overboard, they are practicing for the day when they might have to bail out over the North Sea and survive alone until they're picked up by helicopter. Since most of their test flying is done oversea, survival drill is essential. Without dinghies, nobody would last in the water more than a few minutes because of the cold. Whitehead and other test pilots insist on this kind of drill. They know that they must never get lazy over safety precautions, not only dinghy drill, but all aspects of flight safety. But the fare-paying passenger on a commercial jet like the Triton flies with virtually no escape equipment. Since we have no get-out, it's obviously essential for the aircraft to be as safe as human beings can make it. What kind of testing can achieve this standard? Civil aircraft test pilots cover all the tests done by their military counterparts except for aerobatics. The first prototype of an aircraft like this will spend up to 2,000 hours in the air before final clearance. This is the latest mark of Triton, not yet in service with BEA. It'll carry more than 130 passengers. You'll see two tests on this aircraft. The first one sets the minimum speed at which it will take off, and airline pilots will be told that their minimum speed at takeoff must be higher than that to allow a good safety margin. The test means that the Trident's nose has to be pulled back until the tail, fitted with a steel skid, is scraping along the runway. With full power on all engines and the lift given by the wings at this angle, you can establish a minimum speed and distance for takeoff. John Cunningham is doing this test at Hatfield. Full power on, and the tail comes down. The Trident is airborne. Its thrust and lift have overcome its drag, and the minimum standard has been established. This safety test is now done on every new civil aircraft. One day this passenger compartment will look like any other, but during the tests it's simply a shell. On the flight deck, Cunningham and his crew are preparing for the second test. This one will prove new automatic flying controls, which again set new standards of flight safety. For a large part of its time, the modern passenger plane is flown by the autopilot. The fully automatic landing system has also been proved and is in operation. The system John Cunningham is now going to test is called auto overshoot. It enables the pilot to cancel his landing a few feet from the ground if he sees danger ahead, again automatically. A flight observer in the passenger compartment is monitoring the behavior of the aircraft. The aircraft is set for an automatic landing with the runway ahead. With automatic overshoot, the pilot can pull off by one action on the throttles.
The automatic pilot is flying the aircraft down, presently going to 350 feet, and we're going to make this overshoot from a low altitude just by opening the throttles, and the automatic pilot will do the rest. 200 feet. We have the aircraft on the glide slope. Green lights. And our height is now coming to 50 feet, and we are back. 25 feet open and overshoot. It's all automatic.
In an emergency, auto overshoot is quicker and more precise than the human pilot. But with flying as automated as this, is the test pilot's life really worthwhile?
Test flying is in a category on its own. Test flying can never be boring. And even with the state of the art, all the technological advances we've made, there's still the unknown occasionally. We still get caught out. And you never stop learning.